Many of us have experienced what it's like to be around people and family for an extended period of time that we actually become like one another. Often it actually gets expressed by the way that we speak, or we speak a new language. James says that the tongue, even though it's small, actually makes great boast. You see, words can be very powerful. Christy, have you ever been in a situation where you didn't want to be there and you actually had to give yourself a self-talk? Mm-hmm. I certainly have. In fact, years ago, I was in a sales position and I had to make calls back to back to back. And a lot of times I showed up with a very bad attitude. And so I had to practice what we called affirmations to get myself in the right frame of mind in order to make those calls. And so I'd say things like, I'm alive, excited, and full of energy, and I didn't believe it. But I would say it again, I'm alive, excited, and full of energy. And again, I'm alive, excited, and full of energy. I'm alive, excited, and full of energy until I began actually believing what it was that I was speaking to myself. I began getting excited about getting on the phone for the next couple hours. Language has a direct impact on how we feel. Another example is when recently I sat down at the breakfast table, and for whatever reason this particular day, I felt extremely consumed by anxiety, fear, and worry. And this particular day, I couldn't even hold a strong conversation with my family or focus on my breakfast because I was so consumed with this fear. And at that moment, I began speaking a new language to myself. I began speaking God's truth into my life. And I would say things like, God, I know that you're my provider, not me. You love me, you adore me, I'm your son. You care for me. God, you are my provider. You are my provider, Lord. And as I began speaking that truth into my life over and over again, I began believing it. And I saw my emotional state come lower and lower, and I began feeling peace again. There are many examples about how speaking a language can affect the outcomes. It can be in our workplace, it can be helping our kids attempt new things, or it can be in our life group. Language has the power to redirect us. All that said, so what does healthy missional language in a life group really sound like? We need one another, don't we? I mean, that's the reason why we're in a life group to begin with, is because the relationships that we build are so impactful. Through the good times and the bad times, we need one another. We need those relationships that are around us. Recently, I completed one of those triathlons I talked about a little bit earlier, and I decided to go ahead and do it because my friend Chris said that he would join me in it and that we would hold one another accountable. Well, in order for us to complete this size of triathlon, we had to commit to exercising at least 6 times per week. Now, the problem with that is finding when can we actually figure out the time to actually go out and exercise this much, given our work schedules and our families. How would we even fit that in? And so the only place that I found that it would work is if I woke up super early before the sun rose, and I did it around 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. Well, Chris's schedule was similar, and so we committed to it. We said, let's do it. Let's exercise at 5 a.m. for the next 3 months and see where this goes. And it helped us pursue this healthy lifestyle through triathlon. Well, there were some mornings whenever I would wake up and I would hear my alarm, and I was just like, I do not want to get out of bed. But the problem was I couldn't go back to sleep because I knew that Chris was going to be at my door in about 15 minutes after my alarm went off. You see, Chris needed me just as much as I needed him. In fact, I would even venture to say I probably needed him a little bit more. We need one another. We need each other when it comes to this idea of building one another up, and it helps us get to the next level with whatever we're trying to pursue or engage in our lives. We see assessment and accountability everywhere throughout our lives. It's not something we have to fear. In fact, I'd even venture to say that taking assessment can even strengthen our relationships. This lesson is called Assess because we should always be checking in on our spiritual journey. But there's both an internal assessment and an external assessment. The internal assessment we have down pretty well. We do that in our life groups where we take a look at and see how God is influencing our lives and how our faith journey is growing. But our external assessment is where we're actually asking the question, how's it going engaging in our missional pursuit? How's it going engaging in mission with God? They must exist together. It's so important that they do. And as they do exist together, it will help your group grow closer to one another so that as you achieve your goals together, you can finish the race and stay on course.
In his book, Teaching to Change Lives, Howard Hendricks discusses studies that were done of people who are trying to learn something new. What the studies found initially is that people have the potential to remember just 10% of what they hear. As a matter of fact, the only people who can remember 10% of what they hear are actually considered geniuses. That means people like you and I, we're not even remembering that much. Now, these same studies found that if you added seeing to hearing, the potential to remember went up to 50%. That's why visual aids are so important, because we're a visually oriented society. However, what about if you added an action to this learning process? What if you added doing? So psychologists found in the same research that when you added doing to this combination of seeing and hearing, the capacity to remember went up to 90%. That's phenomenal. Unfortunately, what we found is that much of Christian education is predominantly hearing oriented. This is exactly why when we created LEAP, we wanted to be sure to include some experiences to enhance the learning process. Now, if you have taken our suggestion, then you should have already completed a missional experience, either with your group or your church or life group, some group of you. And this is an important part of your process of learning, because this is where you're learning about what life on mission really looks like. This is true for you in this leadership training, but this is also true for your life group, that as your life group goes through these missional experiences, they're going to get a taste, a picture of what it looks like to live life on mission. Now, if you're going through the Moving Toward Mission study, what I really want to challenge you with is not to skip these experiences. Don't skip the missional experiences. Don't skip those family dinner experiences, because it's really an essential part of the learning. You see, Jesus' time on earth was not spent only in preaching. He spent intentional time investing in his disciples so that he could equip them for mission through experience.
We're all in pursuit of something. It's the way God wired us. Maybe for you, it's that next job promotion or becoming closer to your family. This past year, my doctor told me that I had high blood pressure and high cholesterol. So I decided to pursue a healthier lifestyle. I actually decided to do 2 triathlons. And from that, I had to redirect all of my exercise regimen, my eating habits, and basically my entire schedule. I was using the vehicle of triathlons to pursue this healthier lifestyle because my old habits were going to doom me eventually. You see, I think mission and discipleship is very similar. Jesus calls us to make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. He demonstrates it for us even in Luke 10 as he sends out his missionaries. And we're to do the same. Let's take a look.
As we see in these verses, Jesus is preparing to send his team on mission. He calls 72 disciples, and he begins to prepare them for what lies ahead. He does give them specific instructions that we'll look at more in the equip section. But for now, let's really zone in on who and where Jesus is sending his disciples, because it applies directly to our lives today. You see, it's important that we begin with pursuit because we need to begin actually with the end in mind. Before we can begin a life on mission with God, it's important to know who and where he's sending us, both as individuals and collectively as a group. Jesus was strategic. He knew ahead of time the places he planned to visit. And so he purposely sent his disciples to these towns so that they could minister to these people. He knew that he would be entering these towns and he would be engaging with these people. He was already going to be at work in their lives. So he sent his disciples ahead so that they could join him in the work that he was going to be doing. He sent them to specific towns, but even more important than where he sent them is who he sent them to. There are specific people that God has placed in our paths with whom we can build relationships so that we can share the good news of Jesus Christ. These are going to be people that we may already know and people that he's beginning to prepare to bring into our lives in the future.